Hello everyone, Sidewin here, and today I'm going to be talking about how, as a GM, you can start creating a villain. Today I'm going to be talking about the fallen hero archetype, which is rather common in science fiction and fantasy. A famous example of this is Anakin from Star Wars or Arthas from Warcraft 3. And a lot of this video is going to be questions you can use when developing this type of character. Note that this could also be a PC background, but I would advise against making it a particularly bad one, because these characters can go quite heinous, honestly. So to start, I'm going to start with a few questions that GMs want to consider before they make a fallen hero the antagonist of their campaign. These are questions simply raised by the character's existence. This can also be raised with minor antagonists. The biggest one is, could I become just as bad as them? This is a question that the PCs, especially more good-aligned PCs, like a good-aligned paladin, would be asking themselves constantly. Because generally, fallen heroes believe they're in the right. Sometimes they know they're not really, but usually they believe they are in the right. Which leads to these other questions, like, am I just as evil? This is, again, it hits that one type of character far more. Am I truly on the right path? How can they think they're right? Are they right? Am I wrong? These are all questions that especially more principled PCs will be asking themselves the entire time that a fallen hero is in the game. This also makes fallen heroes very good foils for those type of characters. So if you have a party entirely of righteous, heroic characters, a fallen hero can be quite disruptive to the psyche of the characters, because they'll be questioning, like, this person started the same as them, but did not end up like them. I'm now going to go to how you can go about creating a fallen hero. Like, what sorts of questions should you be asking yourself as you're going through the process? These are targeted more to GMs because I'm assuming this is from a GM perspective. So to start, this first set is essentially, who were they when they were a hero? What deeds were they known for? So this can be a good way, like this deed question can be a good way to think, like, why were they considered a hero in the first place? Did they kill a dragon? Were they famous for slaying a demon? And it can also lead to, well, how were they exposed to evil influences? Because it could have been then. This will come up more in the next section. Then another question is, were they truly heroic? There's a chance that the character wasn't actually that much of a hero. They were just considered a hero. Perhaps they were actually just doing it for the money. In that case, they might not fall into this trope necessarily, but the public could view them as being this type of hero. And off that, what heroic traits did they possess? Even less good-aligned characters, when they were acting as heroes, had some heroic traits. Things like bravery or charisma, although that one can be evil as well, or perhaps they were just kind to everyone. These heroic traits can be brought in when the character has their fall, because usually fallen heroes are driven not by a flaw, but rather by believing that they had to do it. An example of this is Arthas from Warcraft 3. He was driven to stop the undead. He saw them wreaking havoc across his land, and he felt like he had to stop them. And that feeling of, I have to stop this, slowly drove him to his fall, as he got more and more and more desperate. The final question is, what flaws did they possess as a hero? Sometimes the flaws can be what leads to the fall. Like, if they were obsessed with one person and that person's life was in danger, would they have left an entire town to die to save that person? That can be a way of going into a fall as well, although that is more minor than a lot of the ones I'm referencing here. Then, what drove them to evil? This section is very important because it'll frequently come up in the campaign, and it will raise the questions for the player characters. First, what situation drove them to evil? What made them think they had no choice but to do what they did? In general, fallen heroes believe they are in the right, so you have to figure out why do they think they are in the right. For Arthas, he believed he had no choice. And that's usually the way it's framed for any of these. Anakin had the same thing in his storyline. So if they were stuck between killing one person to save many, or that's what they believed was the case, that could still be a heroic character. But essentially, fallen heroes push it over the edge. Like, sometimes characters are given no choice. I especially think you should look to dark fantasy for this, because dark fantasy hits these far more, especially that I have no choice. At what point does that character become a villain, rather than becoming an anti-hero? Then the next question is, did they betray someone previously important to them as part of their flaw? This is a common trope in the fallen heroes. They usually betrayed someone, whether that's their mentor, their parent, a student of theirs, but the most common ones are mentors and parents, or older friends of one of those. That is basically the character rejecting their past. Now, you don't actually have to do this to make a fallen hero. They might have just done something with people who were not important to them at all. It might be their own flaw, but generally a betrayal is a good way to essentially have that last shove over the edge moment. The final question is, did they fall prey to one of their flaws, or was it a overexertion upon one of their virtues? So did they act out of a sense of kindness or honor, or did they act out of a sense of pride or a sense of greed? Essentially, these can determine just how evil this person is at this point. Like, if they acted out of greed, most people will view them a lot worse, including probably your players, than they would if it was, say, love. Love is one that generally people have a lot more sympathy for. Whereas greed, not many people have sympathy for that. So the final thing is, do they believe they are truly righteous? Like, this last one is getting into their psyche, and it comes up most during roleplay segments of your campaign. So the first question is, do they regret any of their deeds? Like, do they regret betraying their mentor? Or do they believe that that mentor was just wrong and it was perfectly justified? That's the next question. Do they justify their deeds as being good or simply as being necessary? So you can have a fallen hero who does realize they are kind of in the wrong, but they still believe it's necessary. So someone who's killing off every single person with a certain treatable disease because they don't want it to spread more, they might just think it's necessary. They might think they have no choice again. They might have a choice, but they believe they have no choice. That's essentially how they'll talk to the PCs. Like, when the PCs confront them, like if the paladin comes up to this person and says, "You are a heinous, terrible villain. Why are you doing this? You are utterly wrong." Do they say that the paladin is utterly wrong? Or do they say that, yes, they know they're wrong, but they're doing what's necessary? And the final thing is, are they still the same person? Because sometimes the fallen hero is not actually still the same person. Warcraft Arthas is an example of that. And there are some other examples, mostly when the character ends up possessed. And that also somewhat removes the what drove them to evil, unless they picked up the item and invited it in. Another example of that type of thing is Lynn from Fullmetal Alchemist. I'm not going to go farther on any of those because it is very spoiler filled. So you should, if you're interested in that route, look at those. You could also look at generally any time in media when a character is possessed by something evil, they're the evil thing, not themselves. So you can have that archetype and make it so that the fallen hero is just evil, but perhaps the hero's mind is fighting against the evil creature's mind. But usually, to make them a fallen hero in those cases, they have to have accepted the thing. Like if there is a cursed sword they picked up, they have to have willingly picked up that sword to fall into fallen hero and not into a different type of villain. They have to believe they had no choice but to pick the thing up, basically. And the last slide here is a few questions that you might find yourself confronting as the campaign continues. The biggest one is, can they become a hero again? Because a lot of fallen heroes have truly gone off the deep end, they're not coming back. But redemption arcs, that last question, can they redeem themselves, are also fairly common with fallen heroes. Star Wars is a big example of that, although that story is found in many, many other sources. And the second question will come up if they can redeem themselves, which is, will others forgive them? A lot of works resolve this question by making the fallen hero die immediately after. I'm not going to name names, but it's very common. The hero dies once they are no longer a villain. That's a good way to just shut the door, not have to deal with it anymore. Now, if the person survives, you have that question. This could be a good background for potentially a player character, because can they actually gain the forgiveness of others? Because a lot of the time, fallen heroes have done truly heinous acts. They have shown no remorse, and then suddenly they do.
To leave you with a question.
Will anyone actually forgive them in that case?